Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. This is the Long Journey Podcast with Jason Jamar, detailing my travels across America as I share thrilling stories from my 16-month backpacking trek from California to Maine and my 8-month kayak voyage from Maine to Texas. So if you were wondering from the previous episode how many fence posts are in the average West Texas mile, well, the number is 850. I would count 17 telephone posts in the West Texas mile and 850 fence posts. Day 88. Date, December 16th, 1999. Sunrise, 7:28 a.m. Sunset, 5:37 p.m. Moon phase, first quarter. Elevation, 1,554 feet. Location, Lost Creek, Voca, Texas. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. These lines from Charles Dickens' historical novel, A Tale of Two Cities, ran through my mind as I neared home. Only 72 miles remained. Clearly the best of times. Christmas was soon approaching, and it looked like I would make it home in time. An epoch of belief and a season of light. The day previous, my backpack had broken not too long after I had crossed the San Saba River. The waist strap had broken away from my pack, and now all the weight on my bag rested squarely on my shoulders. The worst of times. It was the winter of despair. Okay, a little melodramatic, but man, it made for miserable hiking with a broken pack. I had always enjoyed A Tale of Two Cities. Like many before me, I was forced to read it in high school. We had to read Great Expectations too, also by Dickens, which, to be honest, I only read it partially and skipped over large sections to catch up for quizzes. I never thought it was so great, but A Tale of Two Cities was different. This was a story I could get lost in. Spoiler alert. In the briefest synopsis, a wealthy French gentleman, Charles Darnay, gives up the family name and leaves France because he can't stomach how cruel his aristocratic family is to the poor. He moves to England, becomes a tutor, and gets accused of treason while trying to help someone, but is acquitted because on his legal team, a drunk lawyer, Sidney Carton, is basically his doppelganger and leaves doubt about the veracity of the eyewitness testimonies. Foreshadowing the ultimate conclusion of the story, Dickens also uses this plot device to save the day and make Sidney Carton the hero at the novel's end. But before that, Carton and Darnay both fall for the same woman, Lucy Manette. But Lucy chooses Darnay, the nobler of the two. Either way, Carton's unrequited love for Lucy eventually motivates him to change himself and save Darnay's life. Years later, during the Reign of Terror in the French Revolution, Darnay is now in a French prison. He was found to be an aristocrat by birth, awaiting death via guillotine because of his family's crimes. Carton is able to smuggle himself into the prison, drug Darnay, and smuggle him out unconsciously. Then he takes Darnay's death sentence because he looks just like him, thus ensuring that Lucy and Charles will have a happy life. Dickens shares what would have been Sidney Carton's final words if he had had time to verbalize his final thoughts. It is a far, far better thing that I do than I've ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I've ever known. Remember how in episode 1 I told you that I was a buff nerd while in the Marine Corps? This was no joke. I have been, and always shall be, a nerd. In high school, I was the biggest Trekkie around. My friends, sometimes at my insistence, called me Captain Jamar. My senior year, as a birthday present, they smuggled my letter jacket away to have Captain Jamar embroidered on the back. The real reason I gave Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities a chance and got into the novel is that it was explicitly referenced in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Otherwise, it would have gone the way Great Expectations had, with little hope. Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is the best Star Trek movie ever made. I grew up watching the reruns of the original series every day after school. I was 10 the first time I remember seeing Star Trek II. It came on regular TV. I mean, network television like ABC, NBC, CBS. This and PBS were all that we had. The most lasting memory of first seeing The Wrath of Khan was definitely the earbuds that controlled your brain. Sorry, another spoiler alert. But even more memorable, Spock dies. What? How can Spock die? The movie starts with a fake out as you watch many of your beloved characters die, only to find it is a simulator. The Kobayashi Maru, a training test for Starfleet cadets to demonstrate a no-win scenario. How we face death is at least as important as how we face life. Wise words from Admiral Kirk to Lieutenant Saavik after her dismal results of the Kobayashi Maru. Playing Saavik is Kirstie Alley in one of her first big roles. Kirk took the Kobayashi Maru test 3 times and cheated the last time by reprogramming the simulation to rescue the stranded Kobayashi Maru, not believing in a no-win scenario. Captain Spock had given Admiral Kirk an antique copy of A Tale of Two Cities as a birthday present. Kirk reads the opening lines. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And asks Spock if this is a message. To which Spock replies, none that he is aware of, except happy birthday. Surely the best of times. The 20-year-old Enterprise is now a training vessel for Starfleet. As the story unfolds, the Enterprise is needed for active duty. Admiral Kirk takes charge of the Enterprise with a boatload of cadets to investigate a situation involving a top-secret experiment, the Genesis device, a device of such power that it terraforms lifeless moons or planets into new habitable planets capable of sustaining life. But it will destroy any life that happens to be there first. Ceti Alpha 6 is on the short list of potential test sites for the Genesis device. Captain Terrell and Commander Chekhov beam down from the USS Reliant to the desolate wasteland below to investigate faint life signs. To their surprise, they find Khan and about 20 of his followers, genetically engineered superhumans. Kirk had banished them to Ceti Alpha 5 after a failed hijacking of the Enterprise 15 years before. Khan informs them that 6 months after Kirk left them, Ceti Alpha 6 exploded and threw Ceti Alpha 5, this planet, off course, making it a desolate wasteland incapable of sustaining life. It was only because of their superior genetically engineered bodies that they had survived as long as they had. Khan introduces Terrell and Chekhov to the last indigenous life form. I really like saying that line because it makes me think of Ricardo Montalban. And he says it so distinctly. Perfect Khan. The only remaining indigenous life form of Ceti Alpha 5, these horrible brain-controlling earbuds that make their hosts very susceptible to mind control. Khan and company take over the USS Reliant and seek revenge on Admiral Kirk, since he never bothered to check on Khan's progress in all the time that he'd been there, and blames Kirk for the death of his wife. At the film's conclusion, after much loss of life and badly damaged starships, Khan, mortally wounded, activates the stolen Genesis device as a final act of desperation to exact vengeance on Kirk. The Enterprise, badly damaged as well, cannot get away fast enough in the 4 minutes they have until the Genesis device detonates. Captain Spock quietly leaves the bridge, realizing that his Vulcan physique makes him the only one capable of withstanding the vast amounts of radiation exposure just long enough to reset the damaged warp engines manually. Spock knows this is suicide, but logic dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. It is his answer to the Kobayashi Maru test that he never took. Instead of cheating death, which you really can't do forever, Spock takes death straight on and sacrifices himself to save the ship and all who are on board. How we face death is at least as important as how we face life. At the end of the movie, Kirk quotes Sidney Garton's sentiment in A Tale of Two Cities as a tribute to Spock's sacrifice. It's a far, far better thing that I do than I've ever done. It's a far, far better rest that I go to than I've ever known. So later in high school, when it came time to read A Tale of Two Cities, tucked away in my memories, this was the book that Captain Spock gave to Admiral Kirk for his birthday. If it was a good enough book to make it to the 23rd century, well, then I too could give it a try. While hiking down Highway 71, I came to Voca, then Fredonia, followed by Valley Spring, all tiny unincorporated towns that you could even miss if you blinked while walking. Cattle outnumber the people here, and the cattle always had the same reaction since New Mexico. I had noticed that the cows would just stand there chewing the cud, intently watching me as I traipsed on by. Then this unified delayed reaction would hit. The herd would run off after I had already passed them. Long past the time to get out of the way if I had been a predator. Which of course I am. Man, I craved steak and pizza so much out here. On the other hand, horses and donkeys came right up to the fence and would walk along next to me, keenly watching me as if to say hello and goodbye. It could be a look of sympathy, one beast of burden to the next. Though I'm not sure about the donkeys. For them, I think it might have been a smirk. They don't call them jackasses for nothing. Then Llano. Now it was becoming real. Llano was close. We had played here occasionally in high school. I would be home in a couple of days. I stayed the night at the Llano Motel and got a much-desired shower. Showers were the one thing that I really missed in this new life. But the best substitute for a shower is baby wipes. Baby wipes go very far in the right direction of personal hygiene when you just can't get a shower. Also at the motel, a bed, though I wasn't quite used to mattresses or beds any longer. I got some breakfast, crossed the Llano River, and passed by the historic Llano Courthouse, completed in 1893, on my way out of town. About 6 miles past Llano, on the left-hand side of Highway 71, the entrance to the Sandstone Mountain Ranch. You can't miss it. 2 flag poles on either side of the gate, behind an elaborate rock and iron fence. And on the left side flies the American flag, and on the right, the Texas flag. There is a slight crest in the hill and a bend in the road just before you reach it, so that as you are cresting the hill, only the flags come into view just above the horizon. First the American flag, and then the Texas flag a couple more steps later. This felt appropriate for the adventure I was on. The 2 flags summed up this portion of the trip. I was trekking across the country, learning more about the nation that I had served. But I was also just 30 miles from home in the Texas Hill Country. I had always had an affinity for flags, especially these 2. While still in the service a couple of years before, stationed at El Toro, I had just returned from Texas from leave and brought back a giant Texas flag and hung it on the wall above my rack. Now, every Thursday evening in the Marine Corps is called Field Day, not to be confused with the elementary school fun and games such as 3-legged races and picnics. On the contrary, Field Day in the Corps is a particular term for a complete and meticulous cleaning of everything. We would spend Thursday nights cleaning, scouring, polishing, and making everything shine for inspections the following day. Well, you had to have pre-inspections the night before to be sure that you were ready for the Friday morning inspections. My roommate and I kept our room immaculately clean all week long. I even slept on the couch or on top of my rack in a sleeping bag so as not to disturb the military-style bedding required for room inspections on Friday mornings. This was perfect 45-degree angle hospital corners, with precisely 18 inches of white showing, 6 inches of the sheet perfectly folded over the green wool blanket, and 12 inches of the undersheet that showed from beneath. So when Thursday night would roll around, we would be done with our cleaning and be inspection ready in under 30 minutes. We would order a pizza and rent the cheesiest, corniest B films, usually horror movies, we could find just to laugh while we waited for our platoon sergeant to come and check our room. Man, I can smell the old Blockbuster store now. This first field day after hanging my large Texas flag, our platoon sergeant comes in and exclaims, "What is that?" I said nonchalantly, "That's the Texas state flag." Thinking, come on, who doesn't know the Texas state flag? I mean, half the Marine Corps hails from the Lone Star State. Everyone knows the Texas flag. Besides, there are 3 types of people who will definitely make sure you know who they are: trumpet players, Texans, and United States Marines. Did I mention I play the trumpet? Our sergeant looked perplexed at my response about Texas having its own flag. So my roommate, whose home was upstate New York, walked over to his secretary and opened the door to reveal a small New York state flag attached just inside. More puzzlement from our sergeant. And he asked, "Does Jersey have a flag?" We all got a big laugh. Later on, as I traveled, I realized that people in other states do not fly their flag as prominently and as often as Texans do. I camped later that day next to Honey Creek, just beneath a stand of oaks, the side of the fence on the public right-of-way. A Texas historical marker nearby talked of early Spanish settlers who came up from San Antonio in the 1750s, searching for silver. But the result of 10 ounces of silver for every 100 pounds of ore was dismal, and most certainly too low of a yield to overcome the commercial costs of procuring the silver. Day 93. Date, December 21st, 1999. Sunrise 7:26 a.m., sunset 5:36 p.m. Moon phase, waxing gibbous. Elevation, 823 feet. Location, Marble Falls, Texas. I had walked through Horseshoe Bay and Cottonwood Shores, and my parents found me making my way down Highway 2147, near Marble Falls. It was so good to see them, and I was thrilled to be home. I had made it. I had backpacked from San Diego, California, to my home in Central Texas, and just made it in time for Christmas. There is nothing like family to keep you humble. After all the pleasantries and once in the car, my dad informed me that I was pretty ripe. It didn't matter how much you tried, your pack became imbued with miles and miles of sweat. Boy, it made me really appreciate everyone who had invited me into their homes over the last 3 months. And I also worried that I had smelled as bad as I did at this moment with my parents. In most every instance, I met people after hiking all day. It was so good to be home and to truly rest and to see all of my family. I had a relaxing shower and a restful evening. News traveled fast that I had returned home. And before long, I had done a couple of news interviews, and people I didn't know knew me. My truck had been waiting in my parents' place, and it was wild to be driving again. I'd gone to our local Shalotsky's, a fantastic sandwich shop that originated in Austin in 1971, but had only just opened here in Marble Falls in the time that I was away in the service. I made it a point to visit every location that coincided with my route. While inside, I was recognized by someone I sort of remembered, but I couldn't quite put a name to the face. He grabbed me by the hand and said, "Don't you see? You are a prophet. After New Year's and Y2K, everyone will be traveling and living the way that you do. You're here to show us how to do it." I thanked him and then went on my way to go eat my sandwich. I was flattered by the attention, but I wasn't quite sure Y2K was going to be as dire as that. And me a prophet? I didn't really think so. My Christmas this year was terrific. My parents gave me the best gift for my whole trip, a friend to travel with me. My family's dog Muffin, a red heeler mix, had puppies about 3 weeks before I got home. The pick of the litter was a red and white little fluff ball. He had floppy ears, was mostly white with red spots and a saddle, and a curled tail, and a face of a husky. He was cute as cute could be and had a very distinctive little personality. He strutted around like he was the top dog, head honcho, the big kahuna. He was a Lionheart. I couldn't decide what to name him, but I knew he was the one that was going to walk to Maine with me. Since the night I had camped in Fred Sproul's Valley near Ramona, California, with his horse-sized dog, I had wanted a dog with me on this trek. I then had that husky that followed me in Quartzsite, but I knew he had a home, and I had to get him to stop following me. The Yates sisters, Gail and Rose, near Quamato, had offered a wolf dog pup after they bred theirs, but that meant me coming back later, which really didn't seem feasible. But this little guy, well, he was perfect. I needed to work for about a month to 6 weeks to rebuild my travel budget, which would be ample time to get him big enough to travel. While trying to decide what to name him besides Lionheart, I watched the John Wayne movie Big Jake with my family. John Wayne movies had always been a big part of our growing up and with my grandparents. Big Jake, set in 1909 on the Mexico-Texas border on the large and successful McCandless Ranch, is a story about an outlaw gang that kidnaps an 8-year-old Jacob McCandless, Little Jake, and holds him for $1 million ransom. His grandmother calls her estranged husband, Jacob McCandless, Big Jake, to deliver the ransom and get Little Jake back. In the movie, most of the people are surprised to learn that he is still alive and tell him they thought he was dead, to which he responds, "Not hardly." I had always liked the movie. Maybe I named the little furball Big Jake. He strutted around like he was John Wayne. Or there was this country western ballad, Big John. However, I was hesitant because I couldn't imagine hollering Big Jake or Big John while calling for my dog everywhere I went across the country. Later that night, an episode of MASH was on the television. I had grown up watching MASH with my folks and loved it. And there was BJ Honeycutt, my favorite character. It is tough to say which one of the ensemble cast is your favorite. They are all so well done. And even though everyone loves Hawkeye, and I do too, there was something about BJ being a little bit more even-keeled and a family man that resonated with me. Plus, the initials were correct. And BJ's mustache had the same color of red as the swaths of color on my new pup. So I named him BJ. BJ was going to grow up walking to Maine. Did I mention it was good to be home for Christmas? Christmas became even more significant during my high school senior year because my understanding of Christmas had changed. My understanding changed after attending the local Christmas pageant that FBC Marble Falls put on each year. It covered the story of Jesus from birth, ministry, death, and resurrection. My understanding had changed because I had started reading scripture with questions, because friends had shared their faith with me. I had 3 friends who had conspired together to pray for me and that I might come to know the Lord. Angie French, Jenny Griffin, and Lillian McCurdy. Angie flat out laid it on the line one Friday night after a football game and shared her testimony and what it meant to be a follower of Christ. At the time, I politely thanked her, but I wasn't interested. However, it did plant a seed. I started to evaluate my life and beliefs. At the time, I was your typical teenage boy and was, besides being a big Trekkie, really into Bruce Lee and studying Jeet Kune Do and Eastern philosophy. So many themes are retold in great stories. Dickens and the writers of Star Trek II touched on the theme of sacrifice for those you love. But as I studied the Gospel of John, found in the New Testament, everything clicked. The gospel message became apparent as I was reminded of Spock's sacrifice of himself to save his friends and the crew of the USS Enterprise, and of Sidney Carton and the Tale of Two Cities. I know that neither analogy perfectly encapsulates the true depth of Christ's sacrifice for us, but it helped me to have a much better understanding. Spock's solution to the Kobayashi Maru was similar to Christ's solution for us. We are the ones who are caught in a no-win scenario when we are faced with sin and mortality. When Spock's logic, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, is weighed in the context of love. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. John 15:13. Then that logic becomes life-giving. Jesus had called his disciples friends if they do what he commanded, and he commanded that they love one another. In this season, we celebrate the incarnation of Christ. We remember he came so that we might have life and have it abundantly. Merry Christmas to you and yours. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. Some people debate whether Die Hard is a Christmas movie. It is set, at Christmas. But for me, Star Trek II and Star Trek III are Easter movies, because the death and resurrection story of Spock reminds me so much about the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Though I like to watch them at Christmas because it all clicked for me at Christmas time. And that was the time of year I became a follower of Christ. In season 2 of the Long Journey podcast, I get a new backpack and prepare for the next leg of the trek to Maine. BJ learns to love his new life as we backpack through the rest of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. We have wildlife encounters, snake bites, rabid skunks, alligators, and coyotes. We trek through swamps, forests, hills, and crazy storms. We learn to winter camp in the snow and ice and face near hypothermia. But more importantly, we meet amazing people everywhere we travel. Please be sure to follow us on the rest of the trek. If you enjoy the podcast, please rate and review it. This really helps. And definitely share it everywhere you can. Thank you, and be sure to follow the show as I have a couple of Season 1 bonus episodes with guest interviews to release before Season 2 starts on February 3rd, 2023. May you journey long. You can find more details about the Long Journey podcast at journeylong.com.